Just start off with everyone being quiet, just so I have room tone with no sound. So for a minute, please, no talking. It's amazing how long a minute is when you're waiting. Okay, we are underway.
Okay. Good afternoon, Mrs. Curry. This is December 14th, 2015, and this is the first video interview for the 7th Ward Discovering Our Treasures Oral History Project.
Actually, I need to have you move to your right more. Her eye line is
Okay.
a little further. Yeah, I think I should have noticed that, but now that she's concentrating on you,
Okay.
a little bit. There you
bit
go.
more?
Good. Yeah, I want to make sure that the eye line is right. And then Elizabeth, make sure you don't lean forward at all.
Okay.
Because you'll actually be in the shot. That's better.
Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna get going again here, standing by.
Do I need to start with
Yeah,
the intro?
let's start, well, the first question, I guess, since she doesn't remember, you don't
Yes.
necessarily need to do that. So we could start with the second question if you want.
Okay.
And whenever you're ready.
Okay. Mrs. Curry, where did you live in Lancaster as a child?
As a child, the earliest I can remember is on Walnut Street in the east end of town. We lived there quite a few, until I started school. And I started school at St. Anthony's. So it was until I went to the first grade, till I was 7.
All right. Do you remember who some of your neighbors were?
On
back
Walnut
then?
Street?
Yes.
Yes. I remember there was a family, an Italian family, that had a fruit business. Names are going to be kind of hard.
And that's all right.
But I know there's one black family of Wilsons that lived on Fulton Street behind us, and there was one black family that lived up the street from us, Irene Murray. But that's about it as far as my neighbors that I knew.
Okay. Who were some of your childhood friends that you played with on those streets? Do you remember who some of your friends were?
To tell you the truth, there was only one family across the street. He had a fruit business, and his children would come over and play with us. But it was in an all-white neighborhood, so naturally I didn't have too many friends. My friends that I had was when I went to school, and but as far as neighborhood kids, I only remember the one family whose father had a fruit business.
Okay.
They lived across the street from us, and they would come over, and that was we played with each other. we were a family of, at that time, 8 children.
Wow.
And I was the middle child. And so my mother was very strict. So we weren't allowed to leave the area. So we played at home with each other. We had a huge backyard at 708, and that's where we played.
Okay.
Yeah, we weren't allowed on the street. We weren't out on the street. We were home kids.
Okay. That's great. You mentioned the schools that you went to. Could you share with us, and particularly because your family comes from a Catholic background,
Right.
so share with us what schools that you went to in Lancaster.
Okay. I attended St. Anthony's when we lived in the east end of town. Even when we moved down into the 7th Ward, I would go to St. Anthony's School. And Catholic High was the only other school that I went to.
Wow. And what was that experience like for you?
In the grades?
Yes.
Early grades?
In the early grades. And
Okay.
some of the school friends that you may have had
Okay. Well,
in St. Anthony's School. Yeah.
if you can go back that far and visualize that we were a black family living in a white neighborhood, so we didn't have too many visitors or other children to play with. So like I said before, my mother was you stay in your own territory, and we just more or less made home, and whatever you could do in the backyard, that was our fun.
Okay.
And in school, in St. Anthony's School, I had a few, I don't want to sound bitter, but I had a few that really liked me. Mm-hmm. But if you go back to those days, being a black child in an all-white school, it had its problems. But my mother even went to school there. Now, how she got there, I do not know. But that's why we went, because she went to school there. The friends I had in school were few, but I was used to it, so I didn't mind it.
And it sounds like your family really was your focal point for lots of activities and things of that sort during your childhood. Is that correct?
Yes. We were sort of a stick-together family. We clung to each other, and we didn't do a lot of visiting. Actually, I didn't know the 7th Ward until we moved down into the 7th Ward. So I had no friends of my race, only our brothers and sisters, and they might have brought home from school, which wasn't too often.
Now, do you remember when you actually moved into the 7th Ward?
Yes. Like I said, I was in the 1st grade at St. Anthony's. It was around that same time. The reason we moved was because times were bad and people were being evicted, and actually they were locked out of their homes. And so I can remember as a very young child, my mother, my father didn't live with us, but my mother and all of us coming down into the ward to find a house to live in. That's my first time that I realized that there even was a 7th Ward. So we came down and we hunted for a house. Finally, my mother found a house down by Creek Lane, down by the creek. And that was our next house that we moved in, across from the Conestoga, from the park.
From the park,
Yeah.
yes.
And the Dennisons lived down, there were 3 families, the Dennisons and Washingtons and our family. There were 3 homes down at the foot of a hill by the creek. And the creek was our play fund then.
Wow, that is exciting. That is exciting. You mentioned the Catholic school that you went to. What church did you attend, you and your family?
Okay. I originally belonged to St. Anthony's. That's where I went to school, and that's where I went to Catholic High from. I didn't join St. Mary's until my girls were born, and I wanted to send them to a Catholic school, so they went to St. Mary's.
Can I ask you why your family chose to send your children to Catholic school versus the city public schools at that time?
Okay, that's a good question, and I hope I can give you a good answer. Like I said, my mother was raised Catholic. How she ever got to be Catholic, I don't know. But she was raised, so she sent us to Catholic school. I beg your pardon. What was the question again?
Why did she choose to send you to Catholic school versus the city public school system?
Well, because she was Catholic.
Okay.
And so we went to Catholic school.
Okay.
And I can honestly tell you a bit that I'm glad that I went to Catholic school.
And why is that, Mrs. Carey?
I'm glad because I didn't have an easy time. There were kids that didn't like the fact that I was a black child. I'm the only one in a whole classroom.
Yes.
My brothers and sisters went there, but they were in a different classroom. And very few of them at that time, really accepted the fact that you were black.
Yes.
In other words, it was more or less like I was out of place.
Yes.
But I did have a few friends that we got along with. And I didn't know any better. I dealt with it. But I want to especially tell you this. I am so glad that my mother sent me to Catholic school, and I hung in there, and I made some friends there through high school, because it made me realize that color didn't matter, that being black is no better or no worse than being white. It's just a color. And it taught me, because we had religion every morning, it taught me a lot about God. And because it taught me a lot about God, it made me love people who didn't want to be bothered with me. So
That's a beautiful statement,
it
Mrs. Curry.
was
That is
just a way of life. It was a way of life for me.
Yes.
And like I say, I'm glad I went, because I can honestly say that I am not a prejudiced person. I don't see the color of the skin. I see, like Martin Luther King said, the contents of what comes out of your heart.
Yes.
And I'm grateful for that, because I can get along wherever I go. I'm not looking for who's black or who's white. I'm just being me.
And that is so evident as well when we moved onto your street and how welcoming your family was to us. That was a beautiful time.
Yes, our street was beautiful.
Yes.
Man, but you can remember, it was peaceful.
Yes.
We slept with the doors open.
Yes.
And the kids played out front. You remember the Boots family?
Yes.
They lived on the corner.
Yes.
They would come to our yard and play with my youngins.
Yes. Yeah, that was a very, very, very good time to be growing up. Now, do you remember what kind of businesses that you went to in the Seventh Ward? What kind of stores? What kind of shops that you and your family
Where we yeah,
shop for groceries, for
okay.
clothing, any of those kinds of things?
Okay, but I know you remember this too because you lived there. At that time, when my kids were growing up, and I moved on Christian Street, you're talking about Christian Street now?
Yes.
Okay. You know that every couple blocks was a grocery store, and it was Jewish owned.
Yes.
And how did we manage to live?
Yes.
Well, we'd run a credit until at that time my husband worked on the railroad, and so we'd run a credit and get our groceries on a bill, and then payday you paid it, and then you didn't have enough of money to live, so you went back and ran a bill the next week.
I remember
Yeah,
that.
yes.
Yes.
So that's.
Do you remember any specific stores that you went to a lot? Any of the clothing stores? Any of the, not necessarily, well, even grocery stores that you sort of went to more often than others?
Well, we had Smitty's on the corner, if you remember that, and we had the one at the corner of my corner. I forget her name. The corner house at the end of my yard.
Yes, and I'm trying to remember that too, Mrs. Curry. I'm sort of forgetting. Yes, at the corner of your house.
Yeah,
Of your
that was a
street.
grocery store.
Yes.
Actually, at that time, here and there and everywhere, that's the stores. They were Jewish stores, and I believe people like me, if they didn't have the money, you could run up a bill until you got paid.
Yes. Yeah, I think that was standard practice at that time. Now, what other social activities were you and your families involved in after school and like in the summertime? What kinds of fun things did you and your family do after school and during the summer?
When we were small, like I said, we stayed close. We really didn't have that kind of relationship. We were just a family. And but my children, like you had a close relationship.
Yes. Very
You would go out, and I can remember you, Elizabeth, and my youngins. You went to the different things that they had.
Yes. The park dances
Yes.
and picnics.
Right.
Yes. Now, I remember like going to the drive-in a lot
Oh yeah.
with
yeah.
your family. Can
Right.
you share a little bit about that?
Actually, that probably was the only out place that we went to, was to the drive-in. Oh, and when the schools had a festival, the kids would save up their change so they could go to the festival. East Junior always had a festival, and George Washington, and so that was their fun.
Wow.
Yeah.
Those were great times.
And we are rolling again.
Mrs. Curry, when you were a teenager, did you have any jobs, part-time jobs, babysitting, anything of that sort, as a young girl yourself growing up?
As a teenager, I think I did what all the rest of us did. You did house cleaning for somebody. We would wipe up, clean floors, babysit. That's all you could get. For instance, I really want to put this in there. When I went to St. Anthony's School, they had a club at the YWCA, a girls' club. And my roommates would go once a week to it. But I couldn't go because I was black. So one of the girls asked Miss Heaton, her name was, if I would be allowed to come. And she said, yes, she can come. So I went to YWCA, to a girls' club, but I had to get permission from her to go.
Wow. Well, there at the girls' club, what kind of activities were you involved in?
We were just more or less doing fun things, you know. Not anything spectacular, just being a group.
Okay.
And I think her purpose was to try and get the young people, you know, to get together, the school children, that they would have some place to go, because you didn't have any place to go during my days at school, after school. You didn't have. So yes, I remember that I went to the girls' club at YWCA, but I had to get permission from the woman in charge that I could come.
That you could come, yes.
Now that was making you kind of bitter, but like I said, I went to Catholic school and I'm the only black one there, so I'm used to that. You know.
But being used to it doesn't necessarily mean
Right. It didn't make me feel any better. It just made me aware that this is how things were.
Yes.
But it also made me, like I said, aware that growing up this way took prejudice out of me.
Actually, that would be a good thing to restate with what the original question was, that growing up, being aware to, I forget what the original question was, but it was what,
one of the things that I think we want to try to get your views on was the socialization that took place, and sometimes the limits that you had in the socialization. So, you know, those experiences that you had at the Y, the learning, your takeaway from that experience was, what did you learn from hanging out at the Y and from your experiences at the Catholic school, and the fact that you were an African American child in that environment?
It actually gave me.
but could you start with, being in the Catholic schools, or, being African American, it gave me, just say something that related to the question. So,
Well, being an African American in a Catholic school just made me realize that there's no difference. They thought they were better than we were, but as far as I'm concerned, we were all alike. I mean, because that's how I grew up.
And there was another piece that you had said earlier about what your religion taught you about those kinds of experiences.
Yes, we had religion the first period of every class. That's how it goes in Catholic school at my time. Mm-hmm. The very first period was religion. Catechism, it was called. Yes. And in the catechism, the question of color didn't come up. You were just people. You were God's people. And so it made you feel like uh, you belong there the same as anybody else, because God made me the same as he made them, and the only difference is the color.
Wow. That's beautiful. That is very beautiful. Now, let's talk a little bit about, as you were becoming an adult and beginning to look for jobs in the community, or even outside of the community. What was it like to look for a job during your young adult years?
That was almost impossible.
And why is that?
Well, because the government didn't make people open up their doors to black people until actually the war. And when the war started,
Are you talking about World War II?
World War II,
Yes.
then they opened up the doors and they began to hire. RCA began to hire because they were forced to hire so many of another race other than white in order to keep their contracts. So that's how I got in RCA. I think the year that I got in, and I also got in because I went to Catholic school, and they considered the fact that I had a good education.
Oh.
Yeah. So
Okay, so there was that double
standard.
standard,
Yeah, right.
in other words. Yes, okay.
Right. Right. I mean, I had to sort of threaten them in a way, because it took a while before they finally called me. I applied. At the time, my husband was out of work. Ralph, you knew my husband. He was out of work. And it was around the Christmas holiday. And I had applied because my sister-in-law had gotten in there. And she would tell me every day, they're hiring people. How comes they're not calling me? So I called them one day and I said, very bluntly, and I meant it, you said my interview was very good. How comes you're not calling me for a job? Is it because I'm black? At the words I gave them.
Yes.
And it wasn't long after that they called me.
Isn't that interesting?
This is the God-given truth.
Wow. Wow. That is amazing, and truly a reflection of the time.
Yeah, that's the way it was.
That's
the way it was.
Careful with your microphone when you bring your hand up to hear that you're actually hitting the mic. So if you don't hold it.
Okay.
Okay. Now, remembering that period of time, and it was just after World War II, what kind of major news stories do you remember as a young woman that stuck out in your mind?
To tell you the truth, Ben, I didn't have time to read the paper. I had four young girls, 4 babies, and I had to work and keep them, and keep my house. So I really don't think I paid too much attention to it.
Just daily survival.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
right. I just did my thing, and it was what it was.
Yes, that's great. That is great. Now, what did you feel about raising your family in the 7th Ward? How did that feel to you? What did you like about it? What did you not like about it in raising your family in this community?
I was satisfied. I was happy with them. They had more friends than I had when I was a child. I mean, your neighbors, you would go and visit one another, and some of them would come in the backyard to play with my youngins. Relationships were more open then because we were living in a neighborhood where there were other black people. And and the other black people felt the same thing that we felt, that they were limited to what they could do, and you just sort of stayed within your limits.
Now, there were lots of, or do you remember lots of community activities that your family participated in, your young girls, that stand out to you?
Excuse me. Let me see, what did my young girls do?
Sort of like when there were parades in the 7th
Oh, yeah,
Ward
yeah.
and
Halloween.
Why
Halloween was a happy time.
Why was that happy for you?
Well, they would dress up in old clothes. They didn't have new clothes, but they put somebody else's old clothes on, stuff with pillows, and go out with a paper bag, and it seemed at that time things were changing as far as the color of your skin. Now, there were areas that you weren't appreciated if the kids came, but the people were opening up. You're black, and you have a right to be here, and you're same as any other child. So why not treat them the same way? I used to get a kick out of the big bag of candies that they would bring in, and they'd sit down and go through it, and then they'd go out again. You know, it was fun. It was fun for them, and the mingling.
Yes.
The mingling was there. The mingling was there when my children grew up more than any that I had when I grew up.
Yes. In fact, I do remember hanging out with Joey and Dee Dee many a time during our Halloween
Yes.
adventures.
Yes, it was fun.
All right. You started to talk about the community was changing, and it seemed to be people were more welcoming of those of us who were black into the community. Describe what the houses and things look like on your street and surrounding streets at the time when you were raising your family.
Okay, when we moved there, my second baby was born, and the houses were not too bad. Even when you lived there, the houses on our street, they weren't too bad. They weren't infested with what they are now. The neighbors weren't too happy about you black kids playing in front of them. They didn't like it. They chased them away.
Yes.
But other than that, you know, they got along. And
What do you remember about the way how people kept their property and things of that sort during those years when you were raising your girls?
I think everybody was pretty much concerned that their place looked decent. There wasn't trash laying around. I can remember even you young ones playing hopscotch, and you would mark on the pavement, you know?
Yes.
But it got cleaned off, you know? Now it's an altogether different story. Whatever drops on the pavement stays there until somebody else either kicks it off or picks it up.
Yeah. So in other words, are you thinking there was probably much more of a sense of pride?
Yes, there was. Yes, there was.
From the property owners.
Right.
During that period.
Yes.
Okay. Did you have a perception, Mrs. Curry, that there were bad sections of the 7th Ward as well as good sections or did you not sort of look at the community like in that frame of mind?
I think
were there certain areas that you would allow your daughters
Oh, yes.
to play in, and some areas perhaps not?
Yeah. Well, that was a little bit really before my kids got to the age where they could just go out on their own. That was more in my time. There was spots in the 7th Ward where, let's be honest, they were booze houses. They were. I mean, they were places that people would go, men, mostly men, and run up a tab and get their drinks. And I'm trying to think in particular. Across from me, there was Barney Guggerow. You remember Barney Guggerow?
Talk to me about that, Mrs. Curry.
Barney Guggerow, that's really funny now that I'm old. It was a row of little shack houses that ran behind the main brick houses on Duke Street. In other words, South Duke Street, and then out your backyard and across the alley, and there's this row of chicken houses, I would call them.
Yes.
But that's all the people had to they couldn't afford anything else. And also they had a hard time trying to renting. It was very hard for black people to rent on the front street.
On the main street.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, because the back streets where these, I call them chicken houses. They were 2-room little shanty houses, but that's all they could afford, and that's what they had. And there was a whole, Barney Coyne, the man that had the grocery store, if you remember Barney Coyne.
Yeah, I do.
He owned the whole row of these little houses that was behind the brick houses in the front. And so that's where the people that didn't have money went, because number one, they were black. And the brick houses in the front, even if they left them in there, they couldn't afford it because they didn't have the means to pay for them. You know, so I sound like I'm prejudiced, but I am not prejudiced.
No, you were telling your story, Mrs. Curry.
Yes.
That's what's so important to us.
Yes.
We want to hear your story from your life experiences in this community.
Well, see, this is a long time ago. It has come a long way. When I moved to Christian Street, there were only 3 of us, 3 black families. Now, the whole street, you know.
Do you remember who the families were living there when you first moved in?
Mr. Lee Razor,
Yes.
he lived next door. His nephew lived in the house that we bought. When Ralph got out of the service, he got a GI loan, and that's the house that we lived in. And I think I believe your parents came next, I believe. Can you remember that?
Well,
I think
there were 2 other families prior to us moving there. The Roberts, do you remember Bill Roberts further down the street from us?
No. See, down the street, I stayed on my end of the block. I wasn't down the street. I just stayed on the upper end of the block.
On the upper
Yeah.
end, yeah, because when we moved in, there were perhaps maybe 2 more families other than your family on the block.
Yeah.
But that was back in the 50s. All right.
Bertha Evans, was she there?
Pardon?
Bertha Evans.
Yes.
She was there?
Yes, that was the other family, the
Yeah.
Roberts and the Evans.
Right.
Were the other families there when we moved in as well.
Right.
All right, now, what doctors did you and your family use from the 7th Ward? Whenever anybody was sick, who did you go to for your medical help?
Well, by the grace of God, we had our own black doctor. There was Dr. Sturett, the first one that I can remember, and there was Dr. Copper.
Yes.
So,
You basically used them.
or you went out to the clinic.
And where was the clinic, Mrs. Carey?
The clinic was in the general hospital, and people that couldn't afford a doctor, I can remember this well because I sat there several times for whatever you had, like you had a tooth that needed pulled, or you were sick with something. A woman named Miss McMary, she knew my mother, and we would go to the clinic, and that's where you got attended to, because you couldn't afford a doctor of your own.
Now, did you go to any of the local dentists in our community at that time? Did you have any? Did you have your
Are you
children?
speaking of when years ago?
Yes, years ago. When your family was just sort of growing.
Okay.
Did you take your girls to any of the dentists that were in the community?
Dr. Travis, he was a black dentist.
Yes.
He was the only black dentist. And when he came into the picture, then he was our dentist. But he was the only one that was, only black one that was there. You know, it was a time when people, black and white, were beginning to not get angry because another person of another race moved in. Mm-hmm. I mean, we were sort of blending.
Okay.
And
I like that term. Yes.
yeah, and things got more comfortable, you know.
Could we actually kind of try to restate that into more concise? And Elizabeth, if you could slide to your left just a little bit more, somehow you kind of moved over a bit there. You go. Something about it was a time. Just try to condense that thought together.
During the period when Dr. Travis and other African American professionals and physicians were in our neighborhood, I would say during the latter part of the 50s and the early 60s. Talk to me a little bit more about, you were saying that you felt the community was blending a little better, that people were less fearful of each other, that they were feeling more comfortable reaching out and interacting with different cultures a little better. Could you speak a little bit more about that?
Well, I think it was because of the young people growing up. I don't think the young people paid too much attention to color. You know, if you got along and you had done fun things, your color didn't matter. The color thing was during my growing up days. Okay. That's when they did not want, even the young kids did not want to be a part, for you to be a part in their life. But as you children grew up, you know yourself that the people became more friendly. You know, I mean,
you're right.
It seemed like it was, the world was opening up to, there's more than just one race of people here, and they're going to be here, and we get along.
And did you find that occurring more as people were coming back from the war, back from World War II, that there seemed to be a sort of change within our community where people were more welcoming of each other? Do you think that might have been part of the change?
Oh, it definitely had to be, because during the war, I know whatever color you were, nobody worried about it. All they worried about, do you have my back? You know, you know, just am I comfortable with you? Are you going to take care of me? I'll take care of you. You take care of me. Color didn't matter. I'm sure during a time like that, you put color behind you. At least then. I don't know if they do it now, but at least then.
That sounds so true. Okay, what is it? I know that you were a very close-knit family, and you sort of entertained a lot within your own family unit. But as your girls were growing up, what kind of nightclubs and places to go dance and have fun and socialize did you allow your children to go to?
There was the Crispus Attics. I allowed them to go to go where they had friends. Some of their friends even would come home from school on Friday, and I'd fix lunch for them. And this is their school friends from St. Mary's. It was just a matter of, you know, not paying attention to. You know, you're black, I'm white. Now I don't say that everybody did that, but there were some that finally got over or didn't look at this thing as a race thing. They still do, but not nearly as much as they did during my growing up years and my children's growing up years.
Okay. Well, on that same vein, what do you remember the best about raising your family and growing up yourself in the 7th Ward? What are some fond memories that you have, Mrs. Curry, about your life in that community?
Well, my fondest memories are the fact that we found a house. By the grace of God, and we had a couple good neighbors like your family, and around the corner, the Glovers, and down the street the Wilsons, and my brother and his family. He lived down in the next block, so it was a time when people were beginning to, you know, recognize the relationship they had between them, and the kids just played with one another.
That sounds great. Now, on that same vein, what are some of your saddest or memories, some of the things that you wish you did not experience or your family experience growing up in the 7th Ward? What are some of the least favorite experiences that you remember?
From growing up in the 7th Ward? To tell you the truth, I am very happy that I was blessed with my house, and we fixed it up. And by the grace of God, I got the corner, and I could make it pretty, not only for us to enjoy, but everybody else. And I have no problem with growing up in the 7th Ward. I mean,
that is so good to hear.
I have no problem. Yes.
Okay. This is the question, and I really value your comment on this, Mrs. Curry. What impact do you think the educational system had on you as well as your children?
Okay. Well, I'm glad I was a Catholic. I'm glad I went to Catholic school because, like I told you before, we had religion every day. the first period. And I'm not a saint, but I really believe in God. And I believe God made us to love one another. So, you know, I felt good, you know, this.
Do you think that from your experiences and the successes of your children, that the quality of their education was that they received from Catholic schools was different perhaps
Definitely.
than we received in, let's say, the public school
Definitely.
system? And why is that?
I have to tell you that because my faith in God is what carries me through. And there were things in the Catholic school that you weren't allowed to do.
Such as?
I mean, like the public schools. The kids, even though they didn't really want to mingle with you, it was sort of you were out in the playground and they would just sort of try to bring you together. It wasn't groupie. You might call it a little groupie with the wealthy ones. They knew they had more than anybody else, so they were a little better than anybody else. But to tell you the truth, in Catholic school there was quite a lot of poor kids there, and they weren't all black. There were few black, very few black. They were mostly the other children, the white children. We had a lot of poor people of all races during that time, but for some reason or other, it seems like if your color of your skin wasn't right, you know, they were better than you are.
Do you think the fact that in Catholic school the children were required to wear uniforms and everybody dressed alike versus in the public school children came with what their parents could afford? Do you
Right.
think that may have made a difference?
I think it did. I think it made them feel that they were getting somewhere in life. You know, I think, yes. I don't think my girls resented wearing uniforms. And I think it's sort of, maybe it made them feel like they were doing things that they were supposed to be doing and not so much of what they shouldn't be doing, like the kids who, but the foundation of it is the fact that you learn about the goodness of God.
Yes.
And we are one people.
Yes.
And we're supposed to love one another.
Yes.
As Jesus said, you love one another as I have loved you.
Yes.
That's the foundation.
Wow.
And
That is so beautifully put.
that's what you get in Catholic school.
That is so beautifully put.
Now, I can't say about today. Today, I think it's more about money.
Yeah. I think that's across the board.
Yeah.
Let me ask you as a closing question, what is it that you would like the future audience to know about the Curry experience in the 7th Ward? If you could leave a statement for the future generation as they look at these videos and look at our documentary, what is it that what message would you like to leave or for us to document about your experience growing up in this culturally diverse community?
Today, I think the young people, they do not believe that they have to earn their living. that they can find it another way. And they can get what they want, whether it belongs to them or not. If somehow they could realize that you're entitled to what everybody else has, but you have to work for it. It's not yours for given. You have to work for it. And if you like what you're doing and you do a good job, you will go to the highest part of whatever job you're working in. I found that for me. I love what I was doing, and I went to the highest grade that a woman could go to. And it wasn't work to me, it was what I liked. And if you could get the young people to realize that they're entitled to what everybody else has, but you have to work. It's not given to you, you have to work for it. And this you can't get into them. You tell me how. I have some that I'd like to get it into.
I knew how to as well. Oh, well, thank you very much. We really appreciated your story. It's a very compelling story, and we thank you for your time and information and making this available to us.
Thank you, Bit.
Thank you.
Thank you for being my neighbor.